Good evening and welcome to our fifth class on the book of Ruth here at theyeshiva.net. Tonight we explore part 2 of A Sword in the Beis Midrash, the great debate about the Jewish identity of Ruth and King David. What did we conclude last time? We concluded with the moment in the story where Boaz, the great leader, the great personality, a judge of the Jewish people living in Beis Lechem, asks his relative to buy the fields of two impoverished widows, Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth, who converted from Moab and became a Jew after her husband Machlon died, escorted her mother-in-law Naomi back to the land of Israel, back to Beis Lechem, and now these two women want to sell their fields. Boaz wants that the plots should remain in the family. They should not be bought by another member of another tribe. So he asks the closer relative to redeem these two fields, buy it off Ruth and Naomi, and in addition to that, to marry Ruth. But the relative responds to Boaz, I cannot do it. And as you know, Pasuk Vav, the 6th verse in the 4th chapter of Ruth, source number 1 in your curriculum right below the video, source number 1, what does he tell him? It tells him, Vayomer HaGoyel, the Redeemer tells him, Lo uchal ligali, I cannot redeem what you ask me to redeem. Pen ashchis es nachalosi, I may destroy my children. You, Boaz, you redeem my redemption, even though I am a closer relative to Naomi and Ruth than you, because this man was, as we learned last week, he was Naomi's uncle, a brother of Naomi's father, a brother of Naomi's husband, a brother of Elimelech, an uncle of Boaz, whose father Salmon was a brother of Elimelech, and a brother of this man who he was talking to. So he was a closer relative to Naomi. Boaz was a first cousin of Naomi. Boaz was a first cousin of Ruth. How was he a first cousin of Ruth? Because Ruth was married to Machlon, and Machlon's father was Elimelech, and Boaz's father Salmon was a brother of Elimelech. Naomi's father was also a brother of Elimelech. Naomi happened to be Elimelech's niece, and then she became also his husband. Also became his wife, Boaz was a first cousin, so Boaz says, you redeem it. He says, no, I can't. I can't redeem it. And thus, he tells Boaz, you're next in the line. You purchase the fields of Naomi and Ruth. You marry Ruth if you want. Rashi explained, what did he mean when he said, Pen ashchis es nachalosi, I might destroy my children? What did he mean by that? What he meant was something very simple. The Pasuk says in Parshas Kiseitze, Lo yavai amoini umayavi b'kahal Hashem. An Ammonite and Moabite convert cannot marry a Jewish woman. Ad olam, even after many generations for eternity, the children of Ammonites and Moabites cannot marry a Jewish woman. If I marry Ruth, who's a Moabite convert, my children will not be full-fledged Jews. I mean, Ruth is a convert, but she can't marry a Jewish man. She can't marry a Jewish man. So therefore, if I marry her, what will happen? My children will be disqualified. Their mother is a Moabite convert. They will not be able to marry an ordinary Jewish husband or Jewish wife. So therefore, I cannot do this. I'm not marrying Ruth. What was his mistake? Rashi says, his mistake was that the prohibition only applies to Moabite men, not to Moabite women. So we asked a gewaldige question. This is the question of the Maharsha. Rabbi Shmuel Eliezer Edel's the great commentator of the Talmud of Masechta Yevamos Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis, and many other commentators. Why is he talking about his children? Why is he not talking about himself? If there's a halach, if there's a Jewish law, and he believes it refers not only to men but also to women, so he's not allowed to marry Ruth. Never mind the children. Why is he discussing nachalasi, penashchis as nachalasi, meaning zari, I might destroy my children? Forget the children. What about you yourself? That's what he should tell Beis. I'm not allowed to marry Ruth. Ich bin a kosher yid, I'm a Jew. I'm not allowed to marry a Moabite. The Torah says you're not allowed to marry a Moabite. I can't marry her. What's it have to do with children? Let's say they'll never have children. Even if there's no children, or there are children, it's really irrelevant. It's before children. Every time you have intimacy with a Moabite woman, as the Maharsha puts it, al kol biyud is allowed. There's a prohibition on every time they have relations. That should have been his argument. Question number 2 is, Boaz, we know the Gemara says in Baba Basra of Tzadik Aleph, Boaz was the judge of the Jewish people at the time. He was the shofet. In fact, our Chazal associate him with Iftzon, one of the shoftim, the later judges in the book of shoftim who judged the Jewish people. Boaz the Iftzon, sagt the Gemara in Baba Basra Tzadik Aleph from Aleph. Boaz was a judge. Boaz was from the Bezdin. Boaz gave a verdict that you are allowed to marry a Moabite convert if she's a woman. The prohibition only applies to men, not to women. In fact, we learned last week, Boaz convened 10 of the elders of the city, of the members of the Bezdin of the court. Remember that there was a Bezdin, there was a Jewish court. There was the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin of 71. There were courts in every city that had the legal and spiritual authority over the Jewish people. He convened 10 and they gave out the verdict that it doesn't apply to a Moabite woman. How does this man, the uncle of Boaz, dare to argue with the Bezdin and refute Boaz? Boaz says it's kosher. Why are you saying it's not kosher? The answer of the Maharsha we discussed and the difficulties that exist on the answer of the Maharsha. We began addressing this question by bringing up another very strange episode in the Gemara in Yevamos. Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis, and let's remind ourselves the story that we discussed. When David HaMelech goes as a young lad to fight Goliath, the great Philistine mighty giant, the famous story of David and Goliath we discussed in class number 1, that actually David and Goliath were not such strangers. They actually were relatives because Goliath was a son of Arpa, who was the second daughter-in-law of Naomi, the sister-in-law of Ruth. But that's not for now. That was class number 1. You can go there. Shaul HaMelech, the king of the Jewish people, asks Avner, his commander-in-chief, Avner, the son of Ner, who is this child? He wants to know if he's worthy of royalty. And Doeg, the head of the Sanhedrin, the leader of the Supreme Court of the Jewish people at the time, and one of the greatest scholars of the era, turns to Shaul and says, you're asking if he's worthy for royalty, you should ask a more important question. Im roi lavoi b'kol. Is he worthy of being a full-fledged Jew to the extent that he can marry a Jewish woman? Why? He comes from Ruth the Moabite. David's father was Yishai. Yishai's father was Oved. Oved's mother was Ruth. And when you marry a Moabite, every child, whether the father, mother, it doesn't make a difference. Havlad hoylech apogum. You go according to the blemished one, according to Jewish law, and therefore you can't marry. So Shaul asks Avner, and Avner says, we have learned Taneina. Amoini v'loy amoinis, mayavi v'loy mayavis. It says amoini and mayavi in the masculine. Amoini with a yud at the end, mayavi with a yud at the end. It excludes amoinis and mayavis in the feminine with a taf at the end, because women are not included in this prohibition. So Doeg challenges Avner and says, why? It says, Mamza, layave mamza b'kahal Hashem, a bastard child, somebody who's born from a promiscuous, immoral relationship. If a woman commits adultery, lives with another man while she's married, they have a child, that's a mamza, or other examples of a mamza. It only includes a male, not a female. So Avner explains, mamza has to do with the word mumzar, a blemish of blemish of the fact that he's alien. And there's no difference between a male or a female mamzer. So Doya continues to ask, it says, Lo Yaveh Mitzri B'Kahal Hashem. An Egyptian has to wait 2 generations, only the 3rd generation of converts from Egypt are permitted to marry a Jewish woman, a regular Jewish woman. Does that also include only a male Egyptian or not? So Avner responds very logically. Avner says you can't compare it. Over there, the Torah doesn't. Over here, by Moav, the Torah gives a reason that they didn't come out to greet the Jewish people with bread and water. Since the Torah gives a reason, it applies only to men. Darker shalish lotzes, man. Darker shalish lo isha lotzes is the nature of men to come out, not the nature of women. So Dayek says, why? The men could have come to the men, and the women could have come to the women. The Moabite women could have come out. So Avner was quiet. So Shaul sent him to the Beis Midrash to find out what the law is. So he goes to the Beis Midrash and he asks him, what's the law about a Moabite woman? The answer is, there's a tradition, Amoini v'loy amoinis, me'avi v'loy me'avis. Doyeg appears in the Beis Midrash, in the academy, in the yeshiva, and he asks all of these questions, and everybody is silenced, just like Avner was silenced in the palace of Shaul. Doyeg triumphs, and at that moment they want to declare in the Beis Midrash that David, he's not a king yet, David, is posel lavoi b'kol, because he comes from the Moabite lineage, he cannot marry a regular Jewish woman. What happened at that moment is extremely dramatic. Source number 2, Omar Rove set, Melamed shechar bar chogar charboy ki Yishmael. There was a man in the Beis Midrash whose name was Yisra. Yisra happened to be a brother-in-law of David. Why? Yisra married David's sister. David had a sister, Avigail. David had a sister, Tzruya. All of these were children of Yishai, their father, David's father. Avigail, David's sister, married a man named Yisra. And in the Tanakh, he's one time called Yisraeli, a Jew. Another time he's called Yishmaeli, a Yishmaelite, an Arab. Who was he? Was he a Jew? Was he an Arab? Amar Rava, he was a Jew, but Chagar Charbei ki Yishmael. He girded himself with a sword like a Yishmaelite, like an Arab. V'yamar, and he said, Kol mi sheinu shemei alachazu yidoka b'cherev, whoever does not listen and obey this law will be stabbed with a sword. Kach mikoblani mi beis diner shel Shmuel haramasi. This is what I received from the Beis Din of Shmuel. Shmuel, the judge, Shmuel, the prophet, Shmuel Hanavi, who lived in Ramah. The prohibition of marrying a regular Jewish woman applies only to an Ammonite male convert, a Moabite male convert, not a female convert. And thus the debate was silenced. It ceased in the Beis Midrash, and no one dared to announce David as Pasha Lavi B'Kol, as forbidden of marrying an ordinary, a regular Jewish woman because of his ancestry coming from Ruth, the Moabite woman. So the Gemara asks afterwards, Yisro was biased, his wife also came from Ruth, his children came from Ruth, Yisro was a brother-in-law of David. How do you trust such a person? And what does the Gemara answer? He couldn't lie because Shmuel was alive, his Beis Din was alive, and you can go and find out what they have to say. So this is something that's easily exposed. The truth would easily be exposed, and in such a case, you can trust him even though he was Negeya B'Davar, he was not objective, he was subjective because it affected directly his family. The Gemara then asks, but Doyeg asked good questions. Why excluding the women? Why are you excluding the women? Just as the men are held responsible for their selfishness of not greeting the Jewish people with bread and water, why not the women as well? So the Gemara brings the 2 psukim. One pasuk from Tehillim called Kvuda Bas Malach Pnima, the glory of a princess is internal. And the second pasuk, when the angels ask, when the 3 guests ask Avram, where is Sarah, your wife? He says, Hine ba'oil, she's in the tent. Reflecting the fact that, naturally, organically, the place of the princess is internal, and therefore was not the responsibility of the woman to go out to the highway outside of the city and greet the Jewish people with bread and water. By the way, parenthetically, the commentators say there's another reason why Ammonites and Moabites are not allowed to marry Jewish women, and that is because Moab rented Bilam to curse the Jewish people. Here it also excludes women, because who rents? The The man rents, the woman doesn't rent. The men owned the money, and they were the ones who paid Bilam for cursing the Jewish people. Therefore, the women were not guilty of it. So both reasons the Torah gives applies to men and does not apply to women. And that concludes the story in Masechta Yevamos Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis about the lineage of David. And here are the great questions. What did Yisra gain by declaring that I heard from the Bezdin of Shmuel that the prohibition doesn't apply to Moabite women? Avner already told King Shaul, we learned we have a tradition. Nonetheless, Doeg could not care about the tradition of Avner, and he refuted the tradition with all the questions. So the same questions that Doeg asked on Avner, when he said Taneina, we learned it, he could have asked on Yisra's statement that this is what I accepted from the Bezdin of Shmuel. In other words, what happened here that managed to silence Doeg and all of his questions? Just like when Avner initially gave the tradition of what he heard, Doeg can still ask questions and the questions can be accepted. So what happens now when Yisra says that he heard it from the Bezdin of Shmuel? Doeg can continue asking his questions. The question is even stronger. As stated earlier, already in the times of Boaz, who was a judge, the verdict was issued that a Moabite woman can convert and marry a Jewish man, a regular Jewish man. Why didn't Doeg accept the verdict of Boaz? The verdict of Shmuel he has to accept. Why not the verdict of Boaz? If the Bezdin of Boaz gave a verdict that Ruth is allowed to marry a Jewish man, how can Doeg now come and refute it and challenge it and say it's wrong? And if there is a reason that he can and refute it and delegitimize it, so why can't he do the same to the verdict given by Shmuel's Bezdin? The same way you can refute the verdict given by Boaz and his Bezdin generations earlier. Why can't he now refute Shmuel and his Bezdin? He refutes Boaz. He refutes the tradition of Avner Taneina. He refutes the tradition quoted in the Beis Midrash. Why can't he now delegitimize the verdict of Shmuel and his Bezdin? And finally, what's the sword? What type of sword? Not cherev. He girdles himself with a sword. He says, whoever doesn't obey this halacha will be stopped by a sword. If you have an argument, what are you using a sword for? If you don't have an argument, the sword won't be effective. Since when do you establish justice through threats of killing somebody? That's not justice, that's not law. That's a criminal act. Leisirtzach. If you have a psak din, a verdict from Shmuel, what do you need a sword for? Shmuel is the Sanhedrin. Shmuel has a Bezdin. Bezdin says, what do you need a sword? And even if you need a sword, the sword won't be effective. That's what establishes right. Right is not established by might. Right is established by what's the truth of what the Torah says. What does God want? A sword will establish it. The Brisker of Hagon Reb Yitzchak Zeiv Halevi Soloveitchik, known as Reb Velvel Brisker, and you have here on the screen his image, the Brisker of's image, a photo of him in Yerushalayim with his two sons. The Brisker of succeeded his father, Reb Chaim Halevi Soloveitchik, Reb Chaim Brisker, as the Rav of the Lithuanian city of Brisk, ultimately escaped the war and lived in Yerushalayim for the last stage of his life where he passed away, Erev Yom Kippur Tovshin Chaf, 1959. He's known as Reb Velvel Brisker. Reb Velvel, the son of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. In his commentary on Rus, presents a beautiful explanation. Now, this explanation is often quoted in books and commentaries, contemporary commentaries, who discuss Rus. I did not see anybody mention that the same exact interpretation, although more brief and with slight differences, is already brought in a book a generation before the Briskerov. And that's in the commentary of the Ben Yehoyada on Masechta Yevamos Daf Ayin Vav. The Ben Yehoyada is a commentary on Gemara that was authored by Rabbeinu Yosef Chaim of Baghdad. And you have his image here too on the screen, his painting, the second image. Rabbeinu Yosef Chaim of Baghdad is also known because of his books, the Ben Ish Chai. In fact, earlier classes I quoted extensively of his commentary on Ruth, known as Eim HaMelech, the mother of the king. And in his commentary, Ben Yehoyada and Yevamos, he addresses some of the above questions, and he gives an answer. And he was a generation before the Brisker. The Brisker passed away in 1959, Tafshin Chaf. He passed away 1909 in Iraq. He was a great mystic, a Kabbalist, a great Rav, a Posek, one of the greatest halachic authorities in the Sephardic community and the Jews of the East, Iraq, Iran, and so forth, known as the Ben Ish Chai. But Shneim l'davar echad niskavnu. Shneim l'davar echad. They once, there was once a famous Rosh Yeshiva, a dean of a yeshiva, who gave a shir. He gave a lecture, a Talmudic lecture, and he came up with a beautiful, beautiful idea. And one of the students comes over to him and says, Rabbi, I found it in another sefer. You think it's your original idea? I really found it in another sefer earlier. Somebody else wrote it. So he responded to him and he said, when you're traveling, as me geht auf den gleichen Weg, trefft man noch Menschen was fahren. Als man geht auf a krummen Weg, trefft man keinmal nicht. If you're traveling far away, areas that are more isolated, not so populated. If you go on the highway, if you go in the direct way, you'll meet other cars, you'll meet other vehicles, you'll meet other travelers. But if you end up getting lost somewhere and you take some weird path that's just taking you far, far away from your destination, you usually won't meet anybody. When you get lost in the middle of the night in the Catskill Mountains or some other regions that are very dark and isolated, you end up in some path. There's nobody there for miles. So he says, the fact that you found it another Sfada means, I'm going in a direct path, so I meet other travelers. When you go on an original crooked path, you won't meet anybody. In other words, sometimes being original is not the best thing. They say there was once a student who prepared his doctorate and he gave it into his professor, and the professor reviewed it, and the professor made a big X on his work and then wrote on the top, it's good and original, and failed him. So the student comes running to him and says, I don't understand. You X it out, you tell me I failed, but then you write on the top that it's good and it's original. So the professor says, it's true, it's good and it's original. There's only one problem. The part that's good is not original. The part that's original is not good. So originality is important, but sometimes the fact that other people say it means there's a truth to it, and therefore other people encountered it. So back to this vart. I'm just saying I see it everywhere quoted in the name of the Brisker Rav, who really does elaborate on it, but the Ben Yehoyada already says it a generation earlier, even though much more concise, much more brief, and not with some of the details that the Brisker Rav explains. In order to understand the insight of the Brisker Rav, Reb Velvel, we have to learn a Rambam. We have to learn a Rambam. Open up, please, to your curriculum under the video, the PhD, source number 3. Zok the Rambam. Rambam Hilchos Mamrim Peirik Aleph, the laws of Mamrim, of those who betray the court, chapter 1. Halacha Gimel. Echad Varim Shalom Devoisen Mipi Shmua V'hem Torah Shabal Peh. Whether it's insights that the sages learned Mipi Hashmua, meaning they received it as a tradition from generation to generation, all the way back to Moshe, which is the oral tradition. Ve'echad varim shalom devoisen mipi daiten b'achas min hamidrash sha'atayra nidreshes b'hen v'nida b'neim sha'adin b'davar zekach. Or if it's insights that they derived from one of the attributes, from one of the formulas which Moshe gave the Jewish people to explain and interpret Torah, and they felt that this is the correct verdict. Or number 3, if it's those items that the sages built as a fence to Torah, the decrees, the institutions, and the customs. B'chol echad v'echad mishloisha dvarim elu mitzvahs esei l'shmoyam lahen v'ha'over al kol achas men over b'loisasa. In all of these three items, it's a positive biblical commandment to obey them, and if one does transgress them, they are committing a negative commandment, as the Rambam continues to discuss the sources of Chumash. In other words, the Rambam tells us there are three dimensions, three aspects to the authority that Hashem, through Moses in the Torah, gives to Bezdin, gives to the Sanhedrin, gives to the supreme Jewish court in every generation. Number one, part of Torah was not transcribed, it was transmitted orally, traditions that Moshe Rabbeinu gave them at Sinai. They were not transcribed, they were transmitted orally. For example, it says that we put on tefillin, but how do you know tefillin are black? It doesn't say anywhere in Chumash that tefillin are black. How do you know that tefillin are square? It doesn't say. These are called halacha l'Moshe Messiah. Nobody argues that tefillin are black, phylacteries are black. It came from Moshe. The second aspect of authority they have is the Torah, the Bible, is a limited document. New situations will emerge throughout history that will require the courts to decide what is the law in this case. Different situations come up, different scenarios come up. Not every detail is discussed in the Torah. So Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Jewish people formulas known as methodology, ways to interpret the Torah, and if they stick to those formulas, they can derive new laws, deduce new laws, and apply the texts to various circumstances that will emerge throughout history. Every morning before we start davening, we discuss one of these sets of formulas. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, B'shloish esrei midas HaTorah nidreshes behen. There are Yud Gimel Midas. There are 13 methods through which we have a right to interpret Torah. None of the sages ever have a right to betray any of these methodologies. You can't just do whatever you want with the text. If you follow this formula, there are other formulas given in Teres Kainim from Rabbi Shmuel, Lamed Beis Midrash, another 32 formulas. But regardless, Bezdin has a right to use this methodology and deduce a law. And the third thing is they had a right to declare, make decrees and institutions to make a fence to preserve Torah, known as the rabbinic commandments or the rabbinic decrees. And the Rambam says there's a biblical commandment to listen to them. And he continues, Halacha Dalet. The Torah says in the book of Dvarim, Al Piyat Torah Asher Yerucha, you must follow the laws that they will teach you. Elu Hagzeres v'atakonos v'aminhagos sheyoru ben l'rabim k'dei l'chazek hadas u'l'saken ha'olam. These are the institutions, the decrees, and the customs that they will guide the community with in order to strengthen the religion and rectify the world. The laws that they will tell you should do, this refers to those laws that they derived by using the methodology and the formulas that Moses gave them of how to interpret Torah. And you must obey everything they tell you. These are the traditions that they received man from man, generation from generation, all the way back from Moshe Rabbeinu. It was transmitted orally. The Rambam then continues, Halacha Hey, Divrei HaKabbalah behen machlokas la'olam. Tradition that comes from Moshe, there's never an argument. If there's ever an item in Jewish law in which you will find a debate, it means it was not received from Moshe. Because if Moshe, our teacher, transmitted what the law is orally, there can't be a debate, there can't be an argument about it. Nobody can argue with what Moshe heard at Sinai from the divine creator, from the author of the Torah. Udvarim shalom de min hadin. Those items that they learned out, not because they received an explicit tradition from Moshe and Har Sinai. Rather, through their own intelligence, they used the methodology that Moshe gave them in order to interpret new laws. Then if Bezdin HaGadol of the great Supreme Court of 71 members in Jerusalem agrees, great. If there's an argument in the Supreme Court, you follow the majority and you give out a universal custom for everybody. What was the verdict? If there's an argument, that's also fine. The Torah gives us the formula for an argument. You follow the majority. Perik Beis Hilchas Mamrim Halacha Aleph, says the Rambam. And here we come to the punchline. Bezdin HaGadol shedarshu b'achas min hamidas kefi ma shenire beineim shadin kach v'donu din. What happens if the Supreme Court used the formula that Moshe Rabbeinu gave them, and based on these methods that he gave them, the 13 methods or the 32 methods, Kal V'chomer, Gzeir Shava, Binyanov, I'm naming a few of them. Dover Elamid Meinyane, Dover Elamid Misayfe, Klal Prat to Klal, Klal Prat Klal. They used these methods, and as a result of that, they deduced a law, V'danu din, and they gave out a verdict, V'amad acherei bezdin acher, v'nir loy tam acher listed oisei hadin. But afterwards, generations later, a new Supreme Court takes over. And remember, the Supreme Court by the Jewish people was very powerful. Everybody had to be ordained, Eish mipiyish til Moshe Rabbeinu. There was smicha. Today we don't have a Sanhedrin anymore. Today we don't have a universal Jewish court. The Sanhedrin was nullified after, at the end of the time of the Gemara. The Sanhedrin was nullified after the destruction of the Second Temple. It still remained for a while, but then it was nullified, and we don't have a universal Jewish body deciding verdicts for the entire Klal Yisrael. Rather, there's a local bezdin, a local court, a rabbis in a city, in a community, and so forth. But here, the bezdin Hagadol that stood up after the first one felt that logic dictates that they should contradict the verdict of the first one. The second bezdin has a right to contradict and give out a new verdict based on what they understand with their mind is the correct law of Torah. Shenemar, the pasuk says in Shoftim, El hashayfet asher yiyeh bayamim hahem. You must listen to the judge who will be in those days. Eina techayev leleches ela achar shayf ela achar bezdin shebedarcha. You have to follow the Bezdin in your generation. So even though in previous generations the Jews had to follow that Bezdin, that Sanhedrin, that court, and they said the law is this, but since they didn't derive it based on a tradition from Moshe, a clear tradition, they derived it based on their own understanding, using the formulas that Moshe Rabbeinu gave them, using the methodology that Moshe Rabbeinu gave them. Now another Bezdin reflects on it, and they come up with a different conclusion. They may have questions to refute it. They may have a different angle. They may have a different perspective. So Torah gives them the right to refute the first halacha, and we can follow the new bezdin. We don't have to listen to that first halacha. I just have to emphasize it's important when this issue is discussed. A person cannot just come and say, I want to change a law because I want to change the law because I think the law is inapplicable. No bezdin had such a right. A rabbi has no right to maneuver Torah, to manipulate Torah. He only has a right. He only has a right to expound Torah based on the principles and the foundations and the paradigms that Torah itself sets up. If somebody comes and delegitimizes Torah, if somebody says a mitzvah is not applicable today, that undermines the integrity of Torah. Torah says every mitzvah is eternal. They can only use the very text of Torah itself to interpret Torah based on the paradigms and the principles that Torah itself gives us, with which to understand and apply Torah. And this is the power, the integrity of all of the Talmudic traditions, all of the Midrashim, and the entire oral body, to see the integrity of the sages, despite the many debates, as we are witnessing here the debates. But that unconditional, unwavering loyalty to the integrity of Torah as a divine document, and to apply it according to its demands and principles, remains unwavering, and hence it's very intellectually dishonest to compare it to other forms of manipulation in Torah which completely lack that unwavering and unconditional loyalty to the text, but that's beyond our present discussion. What do we learn from this Rambam? We learn from this Rambam that there's two ways in which we can discover a law. One is Kabbalah, Ish Mipi Ish, tradition, man for man, all the way to Moshe. Moshe gave over a law orally. There's another way. What's the other way? Yud Gimel Midrash Shater Nidreshes Ben. Moshe gave formulas to the Bezdin of how to learn Torah, how to interpret Torah, how to apply Torah to new circumstances, to new situations. how to learn from Torah different details which are not explicitly stated in Torah. What's the difference between these two methods of discovering a law? There's a major difference. If the law was received as a tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu from Har Sinai, no Bezdin can ever refute it or contradict it. They can have every logic and explanation in the world, a question from here, a contradiction from here. They cannot refute it by any means. Nobody has the right to refute it. No Bezdin in the world could come and say that a Jew is allowed to eat pork, that a Jew is allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, that a Jew is allowed to ignite a fire on Shabbos. Nobody can do that. Those are things that say clearly in the Torah. Things that don't say clearly in the Torah, but Moshe Rabbeinu transmitted them orally, have the same power. Nobody can argue with it. What about if the law was not stated by Moshe explicitly? The rabbis in a certain generation derived it from the text using the formulas of Moshe. Here the Rambam says clearly in Perik Beis, Haloch Aleph of Hilchas Mamrim, another Bezdin. If they have a different angle, they have a different perspective, they have legitimate questions, if they put their mind to it, and a majority of the second Bezdin disagrees with the first, they have a right to change it. They have a right to say, we feel they made a mistake, and this is the halacha. This is part of the oral tradition. Comes the Brisker of, and as I said, similarly the Ben Yehoyada, and says, perhaps this is what happened. It's true that in the times of Boaz, they already knew the halacha, moini v'lo yamoinis, mayavi v'lo mayavis. But how did they know it? What was the origin for it? What was the foundation for it? What was the justification for this halacha? You can say two things. You can say it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Moshe gave over an oral tradition that the prohibition of a Moabite convert to marry a regular Jewish man or woman is only for men, not for women. Or you could say the sages derived it based on the methodology, based on the formulas that were transmitted to them from Moshe of how to interpret Torah. They used one of or a few of those formulas, and they derived from it that in this case it's amayni v'lo yamaynis, mayavi v'lo mayavis. If this is the case, now we'll understand the story beautifully. The Redeemer who Boaz offered to marry Ruth says, Boaz, I have no problem marrying Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite woman. As you said, the verdict is, you yourself said, Amayni v'lo yamaynis, mayavi v'lo mayavis. Ruth is a woman. She's not a man. She converted. I can marry her. I'll tell you what the problem, Boaz, is. Listen what the Brisker said. The problem is this. I'll marry Ruth. We'll create a beautiful Jewish family. Why? Mayavi v'lo mayavis, Ruth could convert. But here's the problem. In 100 years from now, in 50 years from now, in 30 years from now, in 200 years from now, there's going to be another Bezdin. And the other Bezdin will review all of the halachos of this Bezdin. A new question might arise. A similar situation might emerge. And they might decide that the logical paradigms and the rational ideas and the formulas that were employed by the previous Bezdin to allow a Moabite woman to convert are invalid, and therefore they will delegitimize that previous verdict and issue forth a new verdict in which a Moabite woman cannot marry a Jewish man. And what's going to happen? My children will be affected. I won't be affected anymore. I was allowed to marry her. Why was I allowed to marry her? Because Bezdin in my generation says, Mayavi v'lo mayavis. But in 50 years from now, I'm going to have Ein o'clock grandchildren. A new Bezdin will come up. As the Rambam says clearly, if it's something you learned out from one of the Yud Gimel Midas, a second Bezdin can contradict it. They will contradict the first halacha. They'll say, Mayavi v'gam mayavis. And now my children who are about to go on a shidduch, my children engaged Tel Nachupa, we're about to make a wedding, we ordered the caterer, we ordered the music, we ordered the florist. Did others say, what? Bezdin said, Mayavi v'gam mayavis. These ain't a klach, their bub is Ruth. Ruth was a fine Yiddish vibe, but she was a mayavis. And my grandchildren won't be able to marry. What's going to happen is retroactively, Or not, what's going to happen is, I'm sorry, again, what's going to happen is not for me. I'm fine, but my kinder, Zari, pen ashchis es nachalosi, zok Rashi, Zari, that's the problem. Not me, my children, my grandchildren, my descendants. In 300 years it can change. Under normal circumstances, one Bezdin gives one halacha. A second Bezdin sees that the first Bezdin was making a mistake and they changed the halacha, so they changed it. But here he says, if they change it, it's not just a change henceforth. My children were born already. And they'll all be defined as psulim lovei bakal. They'll all be defined as Jews who are not allowed to marry regular Jewish men or women. Boyas, I can't marry her. I could marry her, but I have to think about my children, think about my descendants. That's why Avner says to Shaul, Taneina moini v'loi mayavis. Doeg says, I know that it's a tradition. Doeg didn't argue. Doeg said, I know Bezdin gave a verdict that a Moabite woman can marry a Jewish man. But I'm asking you questions. Don't you realize that Bezdin made a mistake in their calculation? We have a right in Bezdin, if it's not a tradition that comes from Moshe, to refute it. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. This is the authority that God gave Bezdin if they're using the principles of Torah to interpret Torah. Avner was quiet. Shaul says, go to the Beis Midrash. They go to the Beis Midrash. There they also have a tradition. Everybody knew the tradition. Doeg wasn't arguing that there's a tradition. Nobody was arguing. But Doeg says there was a tradition. But how did they derive it? From one of the Midrash Torah Midrashes, man. I'm showing you that it didn't make sense. By Mitzri, you include women. By Mamza, you include women. By Ammon and Moav, you also have to include women. Women don't go out to greet men with bread and water. They could have gone out to the women. You have no logical principle here to base this novel idea that a Moabite woman is excluded from this prohibition. Everybody is silent. They want to indeed declare David as prohibited from marrying a Jewish woman. Now you'll understand what Yisro did. What did Yisro do? So take a look at source number 4. Go to source number 4. Amar Rava melamed shechogar charboi ki Yishmael. V'amar kol mi she'enu sheme'ala chazu yidoke b'cherev kach mikubalani mibeis dina shel Shmuel aramasi amoini v'loy amoinis mayavi v'loy mayavis mikubalani mibeis dinoi. It's a Kabbalah. It's not one of the Midrash Torah Midrashes, ban. It's L'Moshe Messinai. This was Yisro's novel Chiddush. The idea was there before, but they believed that it was something that the Bezdin derived using their own principle, their own logic, based on the principle, so another Bezdin can refute it. Yisro came and said it was accepted. It's a Kabbalah from the Bezdin of Shmuel Haramasti that I received from them, which they received Eish mipi Eish all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu, who declared a tradition, Am bayni v'lo amoinis mayavi v'lo mayavis. And there's a gewaldige raya to this pshat of the Ben Yoyad and the Brisker of. And you know what it is? Take a look at source number 5. Take a look at the Rambam. Hilchis Isurei Biyah Perek Yud Beis. Look at the Rambam. Ammon Moav Isura Nisur Olam. Schorim V'loi Nekevos. Shenem Alayavi Amoini Mayavi. Ammon and Moav are eternally forbidden of marrying a regular Jewish woman. Men, but not women. Male Ammonites and Moabites, not females. Look at the next words of the Rambam. V'haloche l'Moshe misinai. Sha'amoini yazocher v'amayavi yazocher u'sha'asel ha'olam l'sabas Yisrael. Afilu ben bnoi. Afilu ben bnoi at soif ha'olam. Aval amoinis umayavis muteres miyad kisharu umos. It's a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It's a law received from Moses at Sinai that the law applies only to a male Ammonite and Moabite. They could never marry a Jewish girl, even his son and his son and his son's son, to the end of all generations. A female is immediately permitted. She converts, and immediately, after 3 months, she can marry any Jewish man she wants. She can marry any Jewish man she wants. The Rambam uses the word halacha l'Moshe miSinai. By the way, in the Chidushei Hagriz in Abvelvel's Torah there on Rus, where he says this, I don't know why he doesn't bring this Rambam. He brings from the Smag, say from Mitzvahs Gadol. He doesn't bring this Rambam, I don't know why. I think the words of the Rambam, halacha l'Moshe miSinai, capture his idea clearly. Till then, there was a debate. Doeg is screaming, Avner is screaming, this one is screaming, this one is debating, this one says it makes sense, it doesn't make sense. Finally, Doeg silences everybody. He makes everybody blush, and nobody has anything to say. Yisro comes up and says something else. He says it's not something subjected to debates. It's not something subjected to your question or your answer or your opinion or your perspective. Kach mikubelani mi beis dinoi shel Shmuel haramasi. Or in the words of the Rambam, halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It's not subjected to debate. Kach mikubelani mi beis dinoi shel Shmuel haramasi. As azay is the halacha l'Moshe miSinai. Moshe had gesagt, amoini v'loi amoinis mayavi v'loi mayavis. This is what Moshe said. You may have great questions. You may have an answer, you may not have an answer. It's halacha l'Moshe miSinai. The buck stops here. That's the sword. That's what the sword represented. Doesn't represent, I'm going to stab you. I don't have to stab you. Kach mekublani. You don't establish truth through swords. It represented a truth. This is something that's etched in the ground, in the eternity of Jewish history, in the eternity of the Jewish people, like a sword. In fact, in Midrash Rabbi Ruth, the term that's used is not cherev bebeis hamedrash. Gemara doesn't say it, but in Midrash Rabbi Ruth, the beginning of chapter 2, it says that Yisro took a sword and put it into the Beis Midrash. And he says, I'll kill or be killed. What does this represent? The term not cherev, you have in other places in Shas. Famous Gemara in Sanhedrin about Palti ben Laish. There's a Gemara in Ksuvis about Rabbi's passing. It's beyond tonight's discussion. But the point is, Yisro was trying to convey a point. To go against this halacha is similar to issuing upon yourself a spiritual death. It's not subject to debate. To betray this law is a clear betrayal of the divine will, because it's halacha l'Moshe miSinai kach mekoblani mi beis dinah shel Shmuel haramasi. So not accepting this halacha is like a spiritual death. It's something you cannot budge from. It's something you cannot argue with. It's something you cannot move away from. Let me add, the Maharsha also asks, so why a sword? Why a sword? Maharsha says a very interesting idea. Mida keneged mida. Listen to what he says. Quid per quo. The halacha is ha-boyel aramis kanoyin poigin boy, but vein moirin kain. Halacha vein moirin kain. We know the story of Pinchas. Pinchas, in the book of Numbers, Pinchas observes Zimri having intimate relations with a Midianite woman. A non-Jewish Midianite woman. Zimri was a leader of the Jewish people, the leader of Shimon. He's having intimate relations with Cosby. What does Pinchas do? He takes a spear and he kills Zimri and Cosby. People want to slice him. People want to kill Pinchas. God gives Pinchas the gift of peace. The beginning of Parshas Pinchas. Our sages tell us, and Rashi quotes it. Pinchas came running to Moshe and said, Haboyel Aram is kanoyin poigim boy. Moshe was crying, he didn't know what to do. Pinchas says, I heard from you that somebody who has intimacy with an Aramis, with a non-Jewish woman, as it's happening, you can kill them. Yes, if you're going to come to court and ask if you're allowed to do it, they're going to tell you no. Bring them to court. You can't act spontaneously that way. It's something that's not told to be done. It's not an instruction that will be given officially on the record. Bring them to court. But at the spur of the moment, if somebody goes and kills them during intimacy, when they're doing it publicly, like Pinchas did, he won't be killed. He won't be given the death penalty. Although in other situations, you go and kill somebody, you're given the death penalty. Or punished in other ways, here or by heaven. Zog de Marsha. This is what Yisro was trying to say. If you're going to delegitimize David from marrying a Jewish woman, so what are you really saying? You're saying Ruth is in the level of an Aramis. She's a Moabite woman who's not allowed to marry a Jewish man. So Boaz, who married her, what's the halacha? Haboyel Aramis kanoyin poigin boy yidaka b'cherev. You marry Ruth, you have intimacy with Ruth, you could be stabbed. A zealot can stab you at the spur of the moment. So basically what you're trying to do, Yisro was saying, by delegitimizing Ruth, is allowing her and Boaz to be stabbed by the sword. So that's what you should get. You would want to kill Boaz and Ruth because you're saying that Ruth was a Moabite and she's not allowed to marry Boaz. And therefore, if somebody would see Boaz and Ruth getting married, a kanoya, a zealot like Pinchas, what would he do? He would take a sword and stab him. So you deserve to be stabbed. It's not that Yisro was going to stab somebody. He was trying to explain to them the severity of what they're doing. You're basically saying that Yishai, whoever married Yishai, and whoever marries David, and whoever marries anybody from the family of Ruth, those people and their spouses can be stabbed at the spear of the moment when they're doing intimacy, just like Pinchas did. Yisro says, this is what you're doing to them. This is what you deserve. You should be stabbed because you want to stab them by delegitimizing Ruth's conversion, not allowing her to marry a Jewish man. It says also, Chagar, Charboi ki Yishmael, like an Arab, like a Yishmael. Why an Ishmaelite? It's like Yishmael. The Marshal says, Yitzchak told Esav, Al Charbechatichi, you should live by your sword. You should have said, Ka'adoimi, like an Edomite, because Esav went to Edom. Yishmael didn't go to Edom. Ben Yehoyad explains it based on Kabbalah. He says, we know in our tradition, Masechta Sukkah, the Gemara says there's two Mashiachs, Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. It's beyond tonight's class. There's Mashiach, the son of Yosef, Mashiach, the son of David. Mashiach ben Yosef is going to tackle Esav. Mashiach ben David is going to have to tackle Yishmael. There's the Klippa, there's the exile, there are the horrors that came from Edom, from Esav, which is the origin of Rome, which destroyed the second Beis Hamikdash and exiled the Jewish people. That's one element. And then there is the Klippa and the Gullus. There are the horrors that came and come from Yishmael, from the Arabic nations, which also developed into tremendous anti-Semites with an agenda to exterminate innocent Jewish men, women, and children around the world, especially in the Holy Land and other parts of the world. Zog de Ben Yehoyada from Kabbalah, Mashiach ben Yosef is tackling Esav, Mashiach ben David tackles Yishmael. Zog Yisra, by denying David his Jewish citizenship, Chagar Charboi ki Yishmael, you're not allowing Yishmael to be defeated, because this is what's going to happen through Malchus Beis David, Mashiach ben David. You're going to allow the sword of Yishmael to triumph. He gives another interpretation. This is brought in other Sfarim. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, you're not allowed to come into Beis Midrash with a sword. You're not allowed to come in with a weapon. It's disrespectful. How'd they let him in? The Ben Yoyada explains that there were two types of swords. There's the swords that the Edomites wore, long swords. They wouldn't let them into the Beis Midrash. Chagai Charbaki Yishmael, they carried short swords. They carried short swords. This they let him into the Beis Midrash with, or maybe they didn't notice him. That's why it says Chagai Charbaki Yishmael. The Ein Yaakov in Ein Yaakov says something very interesting. He says, there's a tradition in Midrash that Avraham's son Yishmael married a Moabite woman. We know Avraham observed the whole Torah before it was given. Even Eruv Tavshilin, the Gemara says in Yuma, Avraham observed the whole Torah. Certainly he observed the mitzvah that an Ammonite and Moabite should not enter into the congregation of God and marry a regular Jewish woman. How did he allow his son Yishmael to marry a Moabite woman? Certainly Avraham knew that the prohibition doesn't apply to Moabite women. That's why Chagar Charbei Yishmael, the Ein Yaakov says, he girdled his sword like a Yishmael to represent the tradition that we have that Yishmael married a Moabite woman with the permission and the consent of Avraham Avinu, because Amoini v'loya Amoinis, Moyavi v'loya Moyavis. The bottom line is, David HaMelech was kosher. Doeg's issues were refuted. David HaMelech was kosher. There's a fascinating chidah. Rabbeinu Chaim Yosef David Azuloi in his commentary Simchas HaRegel points out a fascinating detail. Open up the book of Ruth and you'll see that every single verse begins with a letter Vav. There's not a single verse that doesn't begin with a letter Vav. It's fascinating. From the first verse, Vayihi b'mei shvoi tashoiftim, all the way, 4 chapters, every verse besides 8. From the 4 chapters of Ruth, there's only 8 psukim that don't begin with a vav. What do they begin with? They begin with other letters. Yud, Shin, Ayin, Yud, Beis, Aleph, Hey, Lamed. 8 verses. What is the Chidah trying to tell us? One of his students understood it. You'll take a look at the next source. Take a look at source number 6. The 8 verses that don't begin with a vav, they begin with another 8 letters. They make up these 2 words. Yishi ba'oihel. My salvation is in the tent. Yishi ba'oihel. No, what's pshat? Pshat is, my salvation is in the oihel. Why? What was the justification that Ruth can marry a Jewish man and therefore David is considered a full-fledged Jew who can marry a Jewish woman? What was the justification? Doeg asked good questions. The Moabite women should have come out. So we should accuse them of narcissistic selfishness and cruelty as well. So the Gemara gives 2 answers. One is Kol Kvuda Bas Melech Pnima. What's the second answer? Hine Ba'ayel. Sarah was in the tent. Yishi Ba'ayel. My Yeshua, my salvation comes from the word Hine Ba'ayel, the tent. So Ruth is saying, all the psukim begin with a vav, and. The link of generations. Vav is always a vav hachibur, it represents the link. But 8 psukim is Yud Shin, Ayin, Yud, Beis, Aleph, Hey, Lamed. Yishi ba'oil, my salvation comes from the oil. It's a fascinating interpretation of the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon writes on the pasuk in Tehillim Kuf Yutes. Take a look at source number 7. David HaMelech says, Sorim ridafuni chinam midvarcha pachad libi. Ministers have persecuted me in vain, but from your words my heart trembles. I rejoice on your sayings like somebody who found great spoil. First David HaMelech says, I'm tremble from your words. Then he says, I rejoice over your sayings. The answer is Rabbeinu Bechaya writes, Dvorcha refers to Torah Shebiksav. Imrascha refers to Torah Shebal Peh, the oral tradition. Torah Shebiksav is sometimes very rough. Dibur is Lashon Kasha. Dibur is Lashon Kasha. It's very tough, it's very brief, it's very concise. Torah Shebal Peh often explains things that we don't understand clearly in Torah Shebiksav. In Torah Shebiksav it says, Ayin tachas ayin, an eye for an eye. The sages tell us it's not an eye for an eye, it means to compensate the eye. But you can't really compensate an eye. So it says an eye for an eye, really it's an eye for an eye, but we give money. And many other similar examples. Zog Vilna Gaon. This is the meaning of the pasuk. Take a look at the pasuk. Sarim ridafuni chinam. Great leaders persecuted me. Who is David referring to? Doeg and others who wanted to say that I'm not fully Jewish. I'm a grandson of Ruth. And from your word, God, I was scared. Because in Torah you write, Lo yavi amoini mayavi bekahal Hashem, and Ruth, my grandmother, was a Moab woman. My Elta, my great-grandmother, was a Mayavi. But in Torah Shabbal Peh, once we heard that in Torah Shabbal Peh, Aloche l'Moshe miSinai, Amoini v'loy Amoinis, Mayavi v'loy Mayavis, then Sasa noichi alim rasecha. Now I rejoice with your saying. From Dvarcha, from Torah Shabbal, I'm afraid. I'm pasal lavei b'kol. I'm disqualified from coming into the call. But from Imraschos kemoitzi shalorov. Now I rejoice because in Torah Shabbal Peh we have the yisoid of Amoini v'loy Amoinis and Mayavi v'loy Mayavis. Here I have to conclude with a story. It's a fascinating story. It happens in the early 1950s. I have to say, I couldn't verify the original source of the story. I heard the story many times. In the early 1950s, the Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, wanted to issue forth the famous law in the modern state of Israel known as Giyus Bonos, the obligatory mobilization of all girls to the IDF, to the Israeli Defense Forces. Just like there's obligatory service for the men, there was Giyus Bonos. He wanted to oblige all of the girls and the women to have to be mobilized to the army. And many of the great rabbis and sages in the land of Israel fought this ambition ferociously. They felt it's going to undermine the army, it's going to undermine the girls and the women, it will be very, very destructive spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and can affect promiscuity and immorality and will betray the borders and the boundaries of modesty that have defined Jewish women and girls for millennia. It was a big war, and they were at the end partially successful. Not completely successful, but partially successful. And so they tell the story that it's known that Ben-Gurion at the time went to visit one of the great Litvish, one of the great Lithuanian rabbis and sages in Bnei Brak, the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Avram Yeshaya Karelitz. And they had a long and very friendly discussion about some of the major issues that were dividing the Yishuv, the new community in Israel, the religious and the secular community. And so the story goes like this. I heard it about the Chazon Ish, whether it was the Chazon Ish or it was another rabbi, I am not sure, but they say the story about the Chazon Ish. David Ben-Gurion was talking to him. And at some point, he said, don't treat me like an Eish Yisrael. Don't treat me as somebody who is trying to legitimize and break and crush Jewish Judaism and Jewish law and Jewish tradition and Jewish heritage. Remember who I am. My name is David. I'm the Prime Minister of Israel. Whose name do I carry? I carry the name of David HaMelech, the second king of Israel. That's who I am. I'm like David HaMelech. I follow his tradition. That's who I'm committed to. Rosh Hashiva told them, that's exactly the point. By what you're trying to do, you are retroactively going to turn David HaMelech into somebody who's not fully Jewish. Because the rationalization from Mayavi v'loy Mayavis amoini v'loy amoinis is because kol kvuda bas melech pnima. It's the modesty of the Jewish woman, it's the modesty of the woman that by nature, organically, she retains her full prowess and dignity when she operates internally. A woman is an internal creature. She's not an external creature. She's a very, very fine and sensitive creature. Modesty is what empowers her to be able to be her fully. By you drafting all the women to the army, you're retroactively saying that the women also should have gone out. There's no kol kvuda bas melech pnima, there's no ba'ayil. So moya of women should have also gone out. So the whole justification of kol kvuda bas melech pnima is not here. So then the prohibition applies also to the women. So David is not a full Jew. So by you allowing this law to go through, you're delegitimizing the David HaMelech. You're making him not Jewish, or not fully Jewish, not Jewish in the sense that he can't marry an ordinary Jewish woman. As I said, he was successful partially in nullifying the decree. Have a good night. We'll see you next week, next Monday.